All right, Clip Notes is live. If you can't listen to every show, but you want to know who was on and what was said, then sign up for Clip Notes. You get a 1-paragraph summary, key moments in bullet point format, and timestamps, and 1 to 4 video clips from the show. This is a great way to stay current, share insights with your team, and maintain your commitment to developing them during these extraordinary times. Sign up at any episode page on the website or send a note to clipnotes, CLIPNOTES, at thisweekinhealthit.com. Welcome to This Week in Health IT, where we amplify great thinking to propel healthcare forward. My name is Bill Russell, Healthcare CIO Coach and creator of This Week in Health IT, a set of podcasts, videos, and collaboration events dedicated to developing the next generation of health leaders. This episode and every episode since we started the COVID-19 series has been sponsored by Sirius Healthcare. Now we are exiting the series, and Sirius has stepped up to be a weekly sponsor of the show through the end of the year. Special thanks to Sirius for supporting the show's efforts during the crisis and beyond. Today, I'm excited. I met Sherri Douville, who is the president, CEO, and board member at Medigram, mostly through social media. I was impressed with their social media posts. We started a conversation, and I looked at her background, and I thought, this would be a great person to showcase on the show to get her thinking on the industry and where things are going, what it takes to be a female leader for a health tech startup, what it takes to be successful as a health tech startup. She has great experience, great background. She's been quoted all over the place in CIO.com, NBC, Becker's, you name it. She has done great work. She's been a part of MIT Technology Review. She's been a part of Johnson & Johnson, just a great background, and I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. All right, today we're joined by Sherri Douville, the president, CEO, and board member for Medigram, which is a health tech company that facilitates communication between clinicians. It allows insights, reduces the time to treatment, just all around. It saves lives. It increases hospital revenue. Great organization. Sherri, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Bill. It's an honor to be here.
So did I get that right? Is that the gist of what Medigram does?
That's exactly what we're working to do. Yes, to save hundreds of thousands of lives and delay disability while helping health systems be successful.
Yeah, that's the fun thing about, once you really get going in the health tech space, if you get past that first hurdle of getting into, getting past sales and the first couple of clients and getting funded, there is something about the ability that we have to impact literally hundreds of thousands of lives, of helping people to get the right information, of helping clinicians to have a better experience all around, and at the end of the day, really, not only enhancing lives but saving lives.
Yes, that is my life's work. So thank you. Yeah,
well, it's exciting. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to, I think. We've gone back and forth on this. What I'm going to do is use social media somewhat, because that's how we met. We met through social media. And I'm going to use that to frame our conversation. But before we get there, I think there's a bunch of stuff to really learn from your journey. So give us a little background on how you got to be the CEO for a health tech startup.
Oh, thank you. So before I joined this company, I was a consultant, and I did economic feasibility and physician acceptance research for primarily medical devices. And I had gotten into that because after about a dozen years working at Johnson & Johnson, which is based on the East Coast, I'm from Silicon Valley, so I wanted to see if I could build a career here locally and be more West Coast based instead of moving to the East Coast. So I'd done a brief program at Stanford called Emerging Entrepreneurs Biodesign. And what I learned, they bring together, physicians, engineers, lawyers. Not many people have experience out in the field, working with physicians. And so I found, it to be a great opportunity. And one of my clients, medical device client, introduced me to the founder. And that's how I ended up becoming CEO. And the board appointed me when the founder decided to go back to medical school.
Yeah, it's interesting how each one of these health tech startups has their own story. At what point did you come in? At what stage were you at? Were you guys raising money? Was it early stage, or had you already gotten through some of those stages?
Yeah, so that's how I had come to become CEO of the company, is that I had brought in some of the early investors and the biggest investor and board member. And so that's what they were looking for, that, in the CEO.
So how far along are you at this point? I mean, you guys have a pretty good client base. Are you progressing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we've done a very non-traditional path. So I have a biopharma background, and so what I wanted to do after we had the testing of our first platform in dozens of clinics, and got feedback on the functionality, we took a step back because we realized we didn't really have at the time the regulatory and compliance infrastructure, that we've been working on recently to build in terms of ISO 27001, 27002, NIST 853, high trust and all the levels, and really making sure that we have that locked and loaded before we really try to go to market on an enterprise scale. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. It's interesting because I just did a consulting project on that. A lot of the health tech startups are trying to figure out the compliance framework for not only HIPAA but for not SOX, but around the ISO compliance for their data center, and some of them around taking payments and those kind of things. It's not as I mean, it's not as simple as what people think to just, hey, go stand up an AWS account and start doing whatever you want in healthcare.
Exactly. I was talking to a friend that I'm working on a technical standard with, and he's based in Israel. And he was saying that even though they're using a public cloud, it's still like 80% of their own work on top of that to really meet the requirements of like a clinical IoT implementation. Yeah. So what to answer your question also more clearly is that what we've been working on, initially the product was like, how do we enable physicians to use their phones? Because right now, like as we see in the pandemic, a lot of us are learning that environmental buildings are actually bad for our health because they seal air in and they don't allow for air change. Well, there's also unintended consequences with mobile computing with modern buildings. For example, windows are coated with metal ions, but people who work on cell phones don't realize that they block cell phone signals. So there's a lot of technical challenges with mobile computing that we spent a ton of time helping to fix. And we were very fortunate to do some research published in the Journal of Hospital Medicine. And it was transparently laid out there that that was a challenge. And so a lot of our early work was focused on that. But then, as you know, to be successful in a healthcare environment, it's so much about the process and the people. So we really needed to also then take a step back, not just compliance and security, but also what is the implementation, what's the change management.
Oh yeah.
Well,
And I've mentored a couple of startups as they engage health systems, and it's interesting that where they start and after they engage a health system, there's so much they learn in terms of how to
yeah,
actually get their technology implemented. But there's also this phase where they if they're going to make it, they will take that input and they will constantly be iterating on their product. And I saw this, one of the people who did this extremely well was Glenn Tolman with Livongo. I remember,
mhm,
having those meetings early on, and now, of course, very recent, multi-billion-dollar, success story from their perspective. But
right.
he was one of those people who was always asking questions: What can we do? How do we? And this is somebody who had been in healthcare virtually his entire life,
Right.
and was still in that, yeah, tell me what we can do, tell me how we can do it better, what are your clinicians saying. It was really interesting to see, and that's really the mindset that startups that make it have. It's like, what else do we need to do?
I completely agree with you, and I loved the email you had sent in some of our preparation that said, "Feel free to correct you." I'm not out to correct you at all, but I love my favorite saying is I'm ready to be wrong. That's what I always love to tell the team, and I feel like to be successful in this environment, particularly in startups, but also in healthcare, we kind of have to incentivize people to be ready to be wrong instead of being wanting to defend being right, and I think we'll go a lot further. You know,
Actually, while we're talking about this, let's it's I have two daughters, and one's in college, one is out of college. and I'm always looking for role models to talk to them about. And I'm mentoring some people as well, and I'm constantly connecting people. But it gives me the opportunity to ask you a question that I think that the people I'm mentoring would love to hear, which is, you know, put yourself in that sort of mentoring role, and
Mhm.
and mentoring another female leader. Let's first talk about a woman who's not a CEO yet. How do you prepare, knowing what you know now as a CEO and board member? How do you prepare yourself when you're not, as you're progressing through your career, so that you're ready to take that type of role?
That's a great question, and I think that really self-awareness is really the biggest lever that you have, because having daughters, you probably have talked to them about it, or maybe you will talk to them about just getting a lot of mixed messages from a lot of stakeholders, or people, or institutions, and really it's the clarity of having self-awareness, and navigating what I think women leaders face, lots of paradoxes. And at some point I got to a point in this journey, and I was very fortunate. Like I said, I brought in the biggest investor to the company, who's also my mentor. But and we could talk about him a lot. His name is Wim Rolance, a great leader. He's got 34 other CEOs in Silicon Valley that he's mentored, and so has seen a lot of movies, mentored a lot of people. And the thing about innovation is that innovation does not discriminate. And so that's why he is then very open to mentoring lots of different people, not just the classic prototype. And so I'd say to your daughter, just work on understanding herself, and understanding what motivates her, and what she's interested in, understanding what drives her, understanding sort of her own psychology, and that's the best place to start. When you're young, because she's in college, right?
Yeah, I mean, innovation doesn't discriminate. Is such a one of the phrases I've been saying an awful lot to people is write your own story. Don't let anyone else write your story for you. They will
That's
have
great
input.
advice.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have input. They're going to be supporting characters or whatever, but make sure you're writing the story that you want to live. And that is such a powerful statement. Innovation does not discriminate. I will. That's going into my file.
I'm
I'll
so
be.
glad. Well, to
I,
credit Wim Rolance, but yeah, yeah, thank you.
Will
Yeah.
do. All right. Well, all right, so we're talking about a woman who is not a CEO yet. Let's talk about a woman who's getting ready for their first CEO role. So they've had a successful career. They've been identified as somebody who can run a company, and somebody's saying, "All right, it's your turn to step into the role." What do you wish somebody had whispered in your ear as you were getting ready to take that role?
I would just recommend that they listen to their own voice, and try to have empathy for people's reactions to your choices. And so what I've learned in this journey is that much of the time, if there's a negative reaction, it really has nothing at all to do with me. And it has more to do with the person, potentially their insecurities. Maybe they had some sort of past big success, and some sort of past technology, and now they're having trouble sort of renewing some kind of success. And so I think one big message I wanted to get out today, especially with the pandemic, is that there's a huge resurgence of bullying just everywhere. And we see it all the time on social media and videos and everything. And so the one thing that really took me by surprise, it was really hard, and that made me a better person, was just dealing with the bullies that came out, and just be prepared for that. And I actually wrote a resource for that I'll direct you to, because it went viral. It was, I think, the title of it was the Toxic Jerk Meeting Guide, and it's all based on research, and so I'm all about using evidence to continually improve. Evaluate, yourself, make sure that, kind of your side of the street is clean. But that also, just recognizing when things have nothing to do with you, which happens a lot, especially now.
Yeah. It's interesting on the bullying thing, and I'm not sure I put it in that category, but I might put it in that category. And I saw some of the posts around wearing masks, and clearly wearing masks, the evidence is just astronomical in
Absolutely.
favor, right? So
Yeah.
if everybody's wearing a mask, the transmission, and there's a reason that doctors have worn masks for a century. So it's there. However, I see too many healthcare people screaming at people through social media, like, you're an idiot, you need to wear a mask. I'm like, that doesn't seem like the way. I wouldn't look at my kid and say, you're an idiot, you need to study more. That doesn't seem to be how we move the ball down the field in a productive manner. I mean, do you think there's a better way to approach this, that we can get more people to just say, yeah, that makes sense, we should be doing this? I mean, that's what I'm seeing when I go out on Twitter and I see people, just, it feels like they're just slamming people for not wearing a mask instead of trying to, I don't know, help them to move down.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think you knew this, but I'm married to a physician, and so I do have a bias, for masks, obviously, and being microbiology, training in my background, I've obviously seen the benefits of masks. We've gotten a lot of mixed messages though from a variety of what you would consider authority figures. And so tend to try to go to a place of empathy, both for those non-mask wearers as well as for the healthcare providers, because if you put yourself in the shoes of the healthcare providers and the situation they face with these patients when they're in the ICU, especially if it's a busy zip code. That is a heartbreaking situation. People can't breathe. They've got people waiting in the halls of the ED. And these are situations and scenes that a lot of us Americans, when we're out in our communities, don't really understand or are privy to. And so I have a lot of understanding for why physicians are so hurt and angry about people not wearing masks, right? But at the same time, the majority of our society are not scientists and they're not physicians. And they intellectually, if they're getting a mixed message about wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, which by the way is not the fault of the authority, because when you think about people that are in public health or even in infectious diseases, the thing about masks is about fluid dynamics and physics and environmental engineering. And those aren't things that doctors are trained in, not even the best doctors. So to blame them for lack of training in fluid dynamics makes no sense, right? And so I think the idea of science and understanding that we're continuing to learn is something that we need to try to socialize and improve across society, right? I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, I'm not even sure I asked the question. Actually, I think one of the best posts I saw, you may have seen this, it had a picture and it had, two people not wearing a mask and one person coughing, and it said, chance of transmission, and they had some percentage. And then they had one person wearing a mask, the other not, chance of transmission, two people wearing a mask, chance of transmission. And, the percentage goes way down, as you would imagine. And I thought
right.
that was a great way to communicate it.
It definitely is, but that hasn't always been communicated to us. Is what the point I was trying to make. And a lot of times, policy announcements are made based on supply chain, frankly, and so you can see how it would be confusing, right? It's obvious
Oh yeah.
from a scientific perspective, but
Yeah. All right. Well, since we met on social media, I'm just going to go through some of the things that are going out on social media right now, and just talk about it. You and I will have a conversation. So, no hymns this year. The next hymns is going to be August of next year. But I mean, you're a health tech startup. A lot of healthcare companies, or at least people that are trying to sell into healthcare, relied pretty heavily on hymns as a place to either kick off their marketing or to have communications with their healthcare clients. How do you think that's going to impact the startup community? Does that slow us down in terms of uh, their progress in innovation or anything to that effect?
well, I'm not sure startups. So if you're talking about sub Series B in terms of capitalization and goals, so early in the life, you're really driving to build your strategic partnerships, and so you would utilize HIMSS more as a watering hole rather than a conference venue like a Cerner or an Epic would. And so depending on the size of the company, I think I see the goals being very different. So I don't personally see the change in HIMSS being a huge barrier for startups now.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, so depending on what stage you're at in your startup would depend on what your objectives are in going to that conference, and even then, HIMSS might not be the right conference to go to, depending on where
Oh,
you're
it's
at.
definitely the right conference to go to. And so I don't want to confuse. I don't want to confuse it. I just mean the way that the type of tool it is based on the stage of company you are. So I always recommend to entrepreneurs to go to hymns because you need to understand what the zeitgeist is saying. Whether you agree with it or not, you can't change something you don't understand. So
That's one of the things I was talking to. I've talked to our listeners about a couple times. Is I go to the three conferences I go to every year. It's J.P. Morgan. I go to HIMSS, and then I end up going to the I now go to the health conference. So if you go to J.P. Morgan, you're going to see. That's about that is a lot of startups there. It's close to you, so you're probably driving up there, I would assume.
that's right. Yeah.
Uh, the health conference also seems to be around that innovation community, really connecting private equity, venture capital, even interacting with other startups, strategic
Mhm.
partnerships, and those kind of things. But again, those two conferences, technically not a lot of healthcare providers there. HIMSS is unique in that there is a fair amount of healthcare providers
That's true.
there, and not only the executives, but also the next level of technical users are at that conference as well.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, do you like have different strategies going to different conferences?
I go to different conferences for different reasons. And so I the two for healthcare that I do recommend and go to regularly are hymns. And that the national one, so it's going to be in August in Vegas. And so I'd like to do that in some fashion, whether it's in person or virtual, depends on how they manage their indoor air. Which is something I'll talk to Hal about. And the purpose of the national attendance is just like you said, it's with the CIO communities together all at the same time, where they've dedicated that time, to catch up with people that they're considering partnering with or that they're learning together with or learning from, and then they're the executives that they work with, they bring them along, and so that hymns is very valuable for that. Now I've also been involved with regional hymns. I've been on the board of that, and that was hugely valuable in a different context, just more to have the regular touch point with people who are working in these IT organizations, on a daily basis, and to really understand, what their life is really like. Because I'm married to someone who's been in hospital administration a long time, a couple of times, and so I lived vicariously through him, and we actually worked together on a lot of the different initiatives that he launched and executed. In some of his roles, but that's very different than IT because he's a physician, right? And so we get to live the same bridge building that every IT and physician organization, I imagine, has to try to navigate, in a work setting, right? And then on JP Morgan, it's very specific the way that I spend my time. So I have certain people that I'm trying to touch base with every year, and so it's a very as a early stage company, you wear a lot of hats as a CEO, and you have to be very careful with time. And so I have a 36-hour itinerary that's very tightly packed that I normally execute on for JP Morgan. It's very different objective.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never done so many 15 and 20-minute meetings than at J.P. Morgan. They tend
Mhm.
to squeeze things in. How they handle the air, I would think that Vegas would be one of the best places to have the conference if that's the indoor air. If that's one of the things you're thinking about, wouldn't you think?
I've had, yeah, I've gotten some good feedback. I have a friend that runs an acquaintance that runs a large conference company in a different area, and he was recommending. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I can message you after this about who he was recommending, because everybody who's really serious about having indoor meetings is taking a hard look at that right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully by August of next year, we'll be looking at a different landscape. But we'll have to just like everything else. We're taking it month to month to see how things progress.
I'm optimistic. Yeah. So
Yeah, it's feeling more and more like August. Um, yeah, but again, just the sheer. I'm not a physician, but just the sheer numbers. You either need a vaccine or you need um, herd immunity, and the number of people that have to get vaccinated is pretty high in order to get to the other side of this. So, which just means we have to get to a vaccine that works and then get it out to a significant number. So that's why I'm sort of telling people it's sort of a month to month kind of thing. Let's see when we get past trials. Let's see when we mass produce the vaccine. Let's see, there's just an awful lot of things that need to happen. But I agree with you. Uh, I'm more optimistic today about August than I was a couple, uh, even a couple months ago.
Yeah, well, what I'd love to see is, and we've been trying to promote this just amongst friends and colleagues, but I would love to see them, sort of aggressively promulgating a code of conduct that really facilitates safe interaction. Because I think we do need to find a way, to resume business. And we actually had a chance to go to our first social outing fairly recently. We felt safe because it was facing the ocean. So you have all the negative ions that help, with filtering some of the virus particles. But I think it's incumbent on all of us as leaders to take our risk management skills that we've had in IT and apply them to our personal lives, help our teams apply them, and help our families and friends. And that's really how we're going to get through this, right? So I would love to see everybody who's thinking about going to HIMSS thinking about what their infection control strategy is, what their PPE strategy is, what the distance strategy is, because I do think that there's actually an opportunity. There was some study that was showing, how if everybody's quiet and they're watching like some sort of entertainment, as long as they're facing the same way, that could be safe, but it requires behavior change on our part. And so it's really going to come down to leadership, collective leadership, committing to a certain set of behaviors for people to be safe and for it to actually be safe. So I'm optimistic it's possible.
Absolutely. All right. So last two topics. I want to just touch on 21st century cures briefly, and then talk work from home. I mean, it seems like we're addressing some of these things. So let's start with 21st century cures. One of the things about this is, patient directed access to the medical record through an open data standard, no special effort.
Hmm.
If you talk to people in government, they are really optimistic. They're like, look, this is what this enables, and this is what is possible. Uh, it could be a potential explosion in innovation around the patient's medical record. We could see new fiduciaries pop up. We could see
Definitely.
patient engagement really move forward. I'm curious what your thoughts are and what you're seeing and what you're hearing.
Well, there's definitely a lot of excitement around it, but as you know as well as anybody, being a recently and former top CIO, the devil's all in the details. Yeah. So what I'm really excited about and looking forward to is the medical community really driving around some of these more complex data elements that we need to see. Codified so that we can really make great use of FHIR. Because the way my perception of FHIR right now is that it's great for sort of lightweight consumer use cases. And then I did want to mention too that I love to defer to people who have better expertise than I do. And that's something I recommend to women to do, is that we don't position ourselves as the genius in the garage or the end all be all. We position ourselves as people who can build teams, who can enable people, who can develop people. And so one person I wanted to really recognize for being a great mentor as well as a leader in this field is Lucia Savage. And she was Chief Privacy Officer at ONC, and one of the privacy legal counsel, I think associate general counsel at United, now chief privacy officer at Omada Health, but also a huge steward of the industry. So I would recommend that you have her on to really give you the all the correct and technically correct, current and future direction on 21st century cures. I mean, Anish did a lot of great work in that. So thank you for pointing me to that. That was a great interview. But,
No, I'd like to do more this fall. I mean, because it's coming at us very quickly, and it's funny. It's coming at us very quickly. It's something that snuck up on us over 10 years. So it's kind of funny to say it's coming at us very quickly, but yes, the timelines are this fall, and I think a lot of people are going to try to cram for the test that's about to come down. So
yeah,
let's
at least you're taking action, and that's
Yeah, and I'd love that. I'd love that connection, and always, love to have more diversity of thought on the topic and talk through it, and at different levels, right?
yeah.
So I love a niche. He really understands the policy. He understands the strategy and where they're taking it. But then there's another level of, okay, you know, how does this play out? How does this play out in the organizations, and how do we get the most out of it? How are are we thinking about it? How are we thinking about it from compliance? How are we thinking about it from innovation? There's different perspectives around this, so it would be
Absolutely.
interesting. Let's
Yeah.
talk work from home. Is Medigram primarily work from home, or have you gone work from home as a result of the pandemic?
Absolutely. So we've always been distributed. Ever since I became CEO, one of the first things I did was close the office because I thought for the size of our workforce, I really, wanted to push the costs down to the studs. And so we've always been working at ways to enable a distributed, workforce and planning to go international, and having collaborators that are international. It just makes sense for us, right?
Is that hard to do? A lot of healthcare organizations are, I wouldn't say struggling. They wouldn't say struggling. I might say struggling
Yeah.
with this concept of remote workforce. You saw Epic try to bring their employees back, and Judy's appropriately said, hey, we're missing some of the magic that was Epic because we're not running into each other in the halls, and Apple made their spaceship, and the reason they made that was to facilitate those kind of things for organizations that are maybe doing this for the first time, or managers that are doing this for the first time. How do you do this well? How do you manage to productivity levels that you want to, maintain the culture you want to, and I don't just how do you balance all that and move the organization forward?
Not by yourself. I tell you that. And you gotta work with your team and make sure that you're on the same page, with expectations around hours, around one-on-one times, and then it's all about developing the relationships. And so I have really radical ideas about leadership, which I'm putting forth together with some other researchers and other leaders in various healthcare, medical device, biotech, and health systems. And it's coming out in a book called Mobile Computing in Medicine, Overcoming People, Culture, and Governance. And we're actually launching it at HIMSS. So maybe that's why I'm promoting HIMSS. I'm very excited about it and for it, right? My point of view is being Gen X and basically being born with a computer in my hand. To me, I think remote work is the future, especially since I do have a lot of collaborators that are international, and it doesn't make sense all the time to get on a plane, even if the plane is safe. And so, in terms of a first time manager looking for a way to promote teamwork and relationships, the three tools I would suggest are regular one on ones. The other one is a book called Measure What Matters. It's objectives and key results. And so, as long as people care about each other and you have objectives you're working towards, they will deliver for the other people. So, you want to build strong relationships so you can execute on those key results. And then the third thing that I've been lucky to have a lot of mentors in various parts of the ecosystem is to have a chance to be involved with different conferences, to write, to edit this book, to work on technical standards, and I always include colleagues in that work, and so it develops them. It also, improves our relationship, helps us learn things, together that we would necessarily learn. And so, in terms of keeping a remote workforce, motivated, engaged, and developing, I think that's what I would suggest.
Well, that's fantastic. So you have a book coming out next year at HIMSS. That's exciting. That's some great stuff that you just shared.
Oh, thank you.
The OKRs and Measure What Matters, I think that's probably one of the top books I've read in the last year. Is
Hmm.
the Measure What Matters book? It really is exceptional. So, Sherri, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was my pleasure and honor. Thank you for having me.
I'll let you have the last word. Is there anything we didn't cover that we probably should talk about?
Well, it's something you brought up in the email, so I wanted to go ahead and address it for you and your daughters, and you can decide whether it's appropriate for a bigger audience, right? But it was centered around how I'm able to do this, and so I wanted to just return back to your support structure. So I am not a single person. I'm a node in a network. that allows me to move forward in what I consider to be a movement. And so I would just consider talking to your daughters about, who's on their team, how do they build their team, and start that really early. And then when you talk about, who the spouse is, whenever I talk to any successful woman, that's always one of the top um, factors into whether or not they were able to be successful. And so selecting the right person, and then having that mindset of constant negotiation, because like I said, as women, we have a lot of different um, stakeholders that have either different expectations or different insecurities that they may try to project onto us. And it's really up to us to define our path. I think you said write your own story. And so this is just an extension from a woman's point of view of how you go about writing that story. And I'm passionate about just telling women about it, because I feel like a lot of times women are looking for approval or looking for somebody else's path. And that's just not the way it works. Right. Right. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. And we are, somebody once said, you're only as good as the people that are around you that you talk to on an ongoing basis. And actually that's a generalized quote of something more specific, like, the 10 people you talk to the most will determine who you become and what you look like. And I think that's so true. And I think that's what you're describing is we are the people we allow into our lives, the people we interact with on an ongoing basis, and the people we choose to spend our lives with.
But you're also negotiating with them, right? Because we all grew up in a context, and we're moving forward in an evolving world. So just one small example is just negotiating with my husband, and the way I suggest to women to do that is to look at your life together like a portfolio of activities, and then make sure that you're clear on your priorities, kind of like okay, ours, right? And then you're saying together like what's important, what's not important. And you'd be surprised sometimes what you assume is important to your spouse, it might not be. And we found that a few times, and it really has helped, move the needle on stress management and prioritization. And so I suggest that. I mean, one very simple example, and I think it's important for women right now, but women in the pandemic have been slammed with this new order of magnitude of domestic overhead. I don't know if you've heard about that or talked to anybody about it recently. But, with kids at home, we don't have kids, but, for a variety of reasons, because you're not going out to dinner, you're not doing takeout and all of that. And so one of the adaptations we made was there's an amazing woman nearby. It's not expensive, so it doesn't cost us more really than buying our own high quality food. And so I looked at my husband and I'm like, look, we used to go out, X number of times a week. I'm like, does it matter if somebody else made the food? Like, I don't need to be. And he's like, no. But you know what I mean? Like as a woman, even Gen X, I kind of, had a pause at the beginning, like, oh, am I, being who I'm supposed to be, if somebody else makes our food, you know what I mean? And I'm just honest about that, because I think women in general, we need to be honest with ourselves about how we spend our time and how we negotiate that with people that we're in partnership with.
Now, I really appreciate you sharing all the things that you have shared. And I don't do this to my daughters often, but I'm probably going to coax them into listening to this podcast. They hear their dad's voice and they want to turn it off immediately.
I don't think that's true, but that's such an honor. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for your time. And I look forward to catching up with you at HIMSS when you release your new book. Should be fun.
Likewise. Thank you, Bill.
That's all for this week. Special thanks to our sponsors, VMware, Starboard Advisors, Galen Healthcare, Health Lyrics, Sirius Healthcare, Pro Talent Advisors, and Health Next for choosing to invest in developing the next generation of health leaders. If you made it this far, you're a fan of the show, please do me a favor and share it with one other person. Shoot them an email, let them know you're listening to the show and you're getting a lot out of it. The other thing you can do is sign up for Clip Notes and then forward it on to your team, forward it on to other people within your health system. Please check back every Tuesday for the news, Wednesday for solutions, and Friday for more interesting interviews with industry influencers. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.